Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for our free CPD Masterclass on mindfulness for fatigue. I'm Barbara Rudd, your host from Lamberts today, and I'm joined by mindfulness teacher and presenter Katie Sheen. Katie's been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years and teaches mindfulness in a range of educational, charitable, and corporate settings. She's an accredited breathwork teacher and has a special interest in both mindfulness for anxiety and mindfulness for pain management. I'm sure some of you here today will have joined us for our previous mindfulness webinars with Katie. So just before we get going, a quick reminder, we put you all on mute purely to reduce any background noise and enable everyone to hear the masterclass okay. Do feel free to ask any questions via the chat facility and we'll do our best to answer as many as we can at the end, or feel free to unmute and ask a question during our discussion time straight after this masterclass at about 1 o'clock. Don't forget, we'll send you a full copy of the slide deck, which include the references and a recording of today's hour-long masterclass to watch at your own convenience. We would appreciate your feedback by completing our survey, and this will then initiate your CPD certificate being sent to you. That's everything from this end, so I'm going to hand you over to Katie. Thanks, Katie.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Barb. Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see you all. So yeah, this is who I am, and so yeah, nutritional therapist, but also, as Barb says, I teach two different kinds of mindfulness. So Plum Village is the tradition of Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, and some of you may have seen that he passed away a few weeks ago, so there's been a lot of information about him and lovely quotes moving around the internet. And I'm also accredited breathworks mindfulness teacher, specialising, as Barb said, in mindfulness for health, including pain and fatigue management. So this is really close to my heart today. And the other thing about fatigue is that I was treated for cancer in 2015 and had an awful lot of pain and fatigue for a long time afterwards. So a lot of this is very heartfelt, and the nerve damage that I had there as well contributed to really severe insomnia. So I'm going to be sharing all about the evidence base with you today, but also, as I say, from that personal experience. And as Barb says, do pop your questions into the chat and we'll be answering them when I finish the slides around 1 o'clock. So great photo. This is absolutely as awful as fatigue can feel at times, isn't it? So what we're going to be looking at is how common fatigue actually is. We're going to begin by focusing on insomnia. And then we're going to move on to focusing on fatigue related to health conditions, because sometimes, of course, we can actually be sleeping for hours and hours and hours at a time, but waking up not feeling refreshed. So that is different from not being able to sleep. And we're going to look at those two sides of fatigue today. So throughout, everything is going to be referenced for you, and I really hope that you're inspired to follow up on some of the references that are on the slides. We're going to be looking at some key concepts and plenty of practical ideas, and hopefully you'll explore them yourself, and then once you've experienced them and seen how they can help you, then potentially you can share them with your clients as well, and that'd be wonderful to feel as though all of this is spreading out to help as many people as possible. So how common is fatigue? Well, it's interesting. When you look at NICE, they recognise that it depends how you ask people, because frankly, if you ask any person, are you feeling tired? Most people will go, yeah, I'm feeling pretty tired. So obviously in the context of research, it has to be quite carefully controlled as to how you are asking people to describe their fatigue. So in primary care for GPs, tiredness is one of the most frequent presenting complaints, and 50% of people with chronic disease report feeling tired and run down as a symptom. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Because if our body is struggling to be well, then that is going to take an awful lot of energy, and that leaves less energy to feel lively, because of course we need energy to both think straight as well as for our body to work appropriately. So when we're supporting our clients, we need to start with those basics. Is there a health condition or associated medication that people are taking that might be influencing the levels of fatigue? In which case your protocol obviously starts with the health condition and starts with supporting the client to metabolize the medication in such a way that they maybe have fewer side effects. how well people pace themselves, we're going to look at in detail towards the end of the webinar today. And we're going to be looking in detail at stress, because that's one of the ways that mindfulness can help, is to help people to deal with their stress. But so it's that real fundamental question is, are they sleeping or not? And sleeping enough, sorry, and if not, why is this? And just pointing out as well is that obviously I'm focusing on mindfulness today, but as you'll see, mindfulness helps us to see things more clearly. So mindfulness in itself isn't always the answer, and obviously we're all here because we practice individualized functional medicine, so we look at all the different things that are going on for people. But where mindfulness can really support us in our clinical practice is helping us and our clients to see things more clearly. Now, we're going to start with insomnia, as I said, and there is this dreadful vicious cycle of insomnia, because if you think about sleep, it should be this naturally unfolding process governed by homeostatic and circadian regulation. So in normal life, it is self-calibrating. So it should be flexible. So in other words, if we have an acute stress, if we have something that we're worried about, it's normal that we don't sleep well because we're thinking about it. Then if that stress drops away, then we go back to sleeping better. So, but because of the cycle of insomnia, there's some really interesting research that talks to people that sleep well compared to people with insomnia. And those with insomnia have unhelpful beliefs, that's an understatement, isn't it, about the negative consequences of insomnia. They fear the loss of control, and they feel helpless about the unpredictability of sleep. And we're going to really be teasing this apart over these next few slides, because notice if you're here because you're suffering from insomnia, talk to somebody that doesn't have insomnia, and it is a real eye-opener where they just say, well, yeah, if I don't sleep well, then I'm a bit tired the next day, and then I'll probably sleep fine and it'll all be okay. And astonishingly, they literally don't really think about it much more than that. And this fear of losing control and this unpredictability, they just don't place the same amount of importance on that as somebody with insomnia does. So a way to help our clients to see this more clearly and to see it more clearly ourselves is to think about primary and secondary suffering. So primary suffering is as though we're hit with one arrow, something happens to us, so we don't sleep well, or we notice that we feel tired. And that's just something that we can't do anything about. But the secondary suffering, it's as though we're firing a second arrow into the first wound. We start to react emotionally to the fact that we haven't slept well. Our mind starts to judge what we sense. It labels it as, oh, this isn't good. And then it starts to create these stories around what it perceives. So what's really worth thinking about is the fact that these thoughts are not necessarily true. So this is a little postcard that I have on my fridge. Is it true? Are you sure? And that comes from Thich Nhat Hanh. And that book that I've referenced there, Fear, is all about managing anxiety. So if you want a really easy to read book about mindfulness for anxiety, I would really recommend that one. It's very, very inspiring. So going back to this vicious cycle of insomnia, people suffering from insomnia can describe their thoughts as intrusive, uncontrollable, negative. So they can't control the thinking. In other words, their mind starts to really focus on the fact that they're not thinking well. They're not sleeping well. And people are aware that their thoughts are kind of stoking that fire of worry and concern over the fact that we haven't slept well. And so in response to that, we place greater effort towards sleeping. It's like you take apart your whole life to think, right, what can I do to sleep well? I'm going to do this and this and this. And obviously there is some basic sleep hygiene that we're probably all aware of. But somebody with insomnia might become very focused on that to the point where they're creating this secondary suffering. So this rigidity in beliefs and attachment to sleep related needs and expectations. So people will say things like, well, if I don't get 8 hours sleep, that's it, I'm totally done, I'll have a terrible day. And of course, if I say that out loud to you, can you start to see what's happening is we're setting ourselves up to fail if we place too much emphasis on getting enough sleep. It makes the whole thing worse. So relative to controls, and this is where it is this awful vicious cycle, people with insomnia report the use of a higher number of sleep interfering processes, including worry, thought suppression, oh no, I can't think about tomorrow, or I can't think about this, and rumination, going over and over. I wonder how I'm going to sleep tonight. I wonder if I can do about this. And then you wake up in the morning. How did I sleep? What made it? You know, and you're going over and over it. So getting caught in concerns about insomnia makes everything worse. So the good news is that mindfulness can help us to break out of this cycle. So what does the evidence base say? This meta-analysis looked at mindfulness interventions for sleep and about reducing symptoms of insomnia and improving sleep quality amongst adults. So that was shown that this is what mindfulness can do. And what they identified was this psychological process model of sleep. So what they worked out is that mindfulness influences sleep by these key 6 sub-processes. So the first one is acceptance. So acceptance is a difficult concept for a lot of people, because they're like, well, why should I just accept that I have insomnia? But thinking about what we've just said about it's our reactions to our insomnia that feed the suffering and make the whole thing worse. If we can just say, yeah, really bad night's sleep last night, this is, you know, a bit rubbish really, but we're not fighting it, we're not pushing it away or trying to deny what's happening, then we have this ability to open up to unwanted experiences. So we take away the struggle. And that's the key thing, is that we're trying to find ways to take away the struggle with the fact that we aren't sleeping well. We're also not wanting to avoid it, to try to deny what's going on. Because if you think about it, if we are trying to solve a problem, if we're not prepared to look deeply at the problem, we can't find a solution for it. So if we're not sleeping well, and we're frightened about the fact that we're not sleeping well, that might stop us with engaging with what's going on. And obviously in our clinic, what we're helping people to do is to tease out all those antecedent triggers, mediators, all those habits, both the way that we act and the way that we think, that might be contributing to the insomnia. So in other words, we allow the insomnia to be here, and we just accept this is how life is in this moment. And connected to that, we would do a lot of practice around noticing the ebb and flow of life. So this would all be helping us to realize that things don't last forever, and the less that we cling to something, the more opportunity there is for it to actually resolve itself. It's a bit like in your inbox, or, you know, your pile of papers on your desk, is that there are some things, aren't there, that if you just ignore, 6 months later you can put them in the shredder. So I wouldn't advise that with everything in your inbox and on your thing, but you can see the point that we're making is that some things just resolve themselves over time. Cognitive diffusion. So this is the ability to notice our thoughts as thoughts rather than getting wrapped up in their meaning. And this is really helpful when you can see your thought patterns. So if I have a bad night's sleep and my mind starts to go, oh, you didn't sleep very well last night, I wonder what was doing, and starts going, I'm like, no, hang on a minute. That is my thinking about sleep. And I've been down this path before, and I'm prepared to engage with you to a certain extent, because it's good that I am actually kind of monitoring my sleep and trying to see the patterns in that. But I will only engage with that thought pattern to the point that it feels constructive. Once it starts to get too much, then I would divert my thought process, divert my attention elsewhere. And this is a basic thing that we practice in mindfulness, is this ability to notice where our thoughts are, to engage with them to a healthy degree, and then to take our attention and place it somewhere else. So being present is really important, and seeing ourselves as observers. So seeing ourselves as more than just a collection of thoughts and feelings. So, for example, in that example I've just given you, is that I have a bad night's sleep, and then my mind starts to go about it, and it's just like, no, I am not my thoughts, because I can think other things. So this is just a thought, I can think other things, but also what is actually going on for me in the present moment. Because extraordinarily, if sometimes when the insomnia was at its height, I could actually hardly sleep all night, but actually I'd be really fine the next day. There'd be so much kind of cortisol and adrenaline in my system that actually I could function really well. So my fears about not functioning would be unfounded. Whereas like last night, I had a great night's sleep last night. I'm actually quite tired today. So the practice is to realize that when my mind is saying, oh, you're not sleeping well, tomorrow's going to be a write-off, you know, you can go, well, actually not necessarily true. Shall we just wait and see how we are in the morning? Because it could go either way. And so by becoming aware that this non-judgmental present might be different from what our mind is telling us it is going to be, then we drop the stress levels and we become much more fluid around our sleep patterns. So back to that idea that we touched on a previous slide, is that our sleep patterns will change, and that is normal. It's normal that we have a bad night's sleep, a good night's sleep, light sleep, deep sleep. If you think about it, the way that our sleep should work is that we sleep when we're tired and we stay awake when we're not. And I work quite a lot with older people who are saying, well, actually, I only really need about 6 hours sleep, but that concerns me. So we look more at how they are structuring their life and maybe accepting that, well, in the morning, actually, it's quite nice to wake up at 5 because actually I like the light. Maybe I'll go out for a walk at that time of day, but I will rest later in the day. I will get a natural dip at this point of the day. And at that point of the day, what I'll do is that I will read a book. And if I feel like having a bit of a snooze, I can do that, for example. Now, obviously, that needs to work in with everybody's individual life. You can't do that necessarily in an office in the afternoon, but it's becoming a little bit more flexible about how we relate to our sleep patterns. Values and action is all about how we are filling our day in the way that I explained then, but also about realizing that we are not defined by our sleep. We are defined by what we choose to do during the day and how we do that. So instead of focusing on, is this a good day or a bad day related to a sleep pattern, which ultimately we can't control, maybe we can look more at the kind of values that we have in life and have we achieved something in the day which is in line with our values. So we can say, today is a good day. I was tired, yes, but I achieved this. I helped this particular person, that made me feel good, and therefore this day was a good one, even though I was tired. So we're changing where we place the focus of how we judge and define our life. So I'm sure you're all really aware of the HPA axis, but just pointing out that things like cortisol, which of course is anti-inflammatory, can affect things like the hippocampus. And this is important for sleep because sleep disturbances are associated with small hippocampal size in post-traumatic stress disorder, although it remains unclear whether the hippocampus shrinks first or after the insomnia. But the hippocampus stores new memories, processes long-term memory, and encodes emotional memories by interacting with the amygdala, which is the part of the brain. They sometimes call it the reptilian brain, which is the reactive one. Oh, here is a threat in my environment. I'm going to kick off the stress response. And this is amazing. In between 5 to 60 hours of meditation, mindfulness meditation can start to increase the hippocampal volume. So what this helps us to do is to process memories, particularly emotional memories, more accurately. And this was studies done with people that have never meditated before. And again, there are other reviews that show after 8 weeks of practicing mindfulness, it's not just the hippocampus, but it's parts of the brain like the prefrontal cortex and the insula, as well as the amygdala. So the amygdala, when you're stressed, is likely to be enlarged and inflamed. That settles down the more that you practice mindfulness. The prefrontal cortex, for example, and the grey matter in the brain increase in volume. So what happens is that we literally start to respond rather than to react to life. So it moves from being a mindfulness practice to actually, you just start to notice that you are naturally calmer. It's because your brain has changed, so it affects the way that you perceive the world. So this is really powerful stuff. And if you think about it, it's the same thing that happens if you exercise in the gym. Your muscles will get stronger. If you exercise the brain gets stronger and changes. So higher mindfulness is associated with better sleep quality in studies undertaken in the following patient populations: post-traumatic stress disorder, post-menopause, post-treatment patients with cancer, males with HIV, asthma, MS, fibromyalgia. So studies haven't been undertaken in all patient populations, but if you're looking for that evidence base for the client in your clinic, then if you go onto PubMed, you'll find papers relevant to all of these different types of conditions related to sleep quality. So having now spoken about insomnia, I'm going to move on to include the kind of sleep that people with conditions like fibromyalgia, but also chronic fatigue have, where they might be sleeping really well, but they're still exhausted. They still have this terrible fatigue. And there is good evidence within fibromyalgia and also chronic fatigue for the use of mindfulness. And the specific aspects of mindfulness that seem to be useful are these: describing, acceptance, non-judging, non-attachment, acting with awareness, and social engagement. So I'm going to work through each of those in a bit more detail for you. So describing means labeling those thoughts, feelings, and sensations. So this helps us with, where I was showing you before about that primary and secondary suffering, because we need to be aware, oh, this is my anxiety. I am thinking like this because I am feeling overwhelmed, anxious, fearful, angry, joyful, happy. It's good. Don't think that mindfulness is all about the negative stuff. We notice the good stuff as well. But simply labeling, oh, I am feeling like this in this moment, means that we're not caught in that feeling in the same way. It's moving towards what they call metacognition, where we're aware of what is happening to us. So it sounds so simple, but really don't underestimate the power of simply noticing how you feel and labeling it. Oh, I am feeling like this. It just gives you that tiny bit of distance. Acceptance I've already touched on, so this allows those feelings to be there. We may not like them, but that's how we're feeling in this particular moment. And non-judging is very related to that. We don't judge ourselves for that, because so often when you really tune into your inner critic, it might be saying, well, yeah, you feel like this, but you shouldn't be, you just need to pull yourself together. And I'm going to talk to you more about self-compassion in a moment. It's really important that we move away from that judging, particularly judging ourselves. Non-attachment means not holding on to views, beliefs, or perceptions. So an example is what I shared with you already, is that I used to believe that if I don't sleep well, the next day would be terrible, or the day after would be terrible. But when I actually connect with how I feel in the moment, there might be moments in those days, and it might last for half an hour, 20 minutes, an hour or two, where I am feeling tired. But if I keep tuning into myself during the day, there will also be many other moments in that same day where I feel entirely different. So I might be feeling energized, I might be feeling joyful, I might be more anxious about something else, and I've forgotten that I've even got fatigue. And so this ability to really notice that if we don't continue to think about something, it will just flow away and change, and that it is normal over the course of a day to feel this ebb and flow of emotions, and to be happy to go with that flow is really liberating about all sorts of different things. Acting with awareness means realizing that you are not your thoughts. They aren't necessarily true, and that gives us the ability to step outside those thoughts that are really beginning to dominate us. And social engagement is so important. It's about recognizing this sense of common humanity, feeling that all people are the same, because knowing that everybody struggles with sleep too, even if it's just for a night, helps us to feel that it's not just us. It helps us to let go of that feeling of what is wrong with me. Just like, well, there's nothing wrong with you. You just haven't slept well. And there'll be millions of people all over the world that haven't slept well last night. But that doesn't mean that tonight you might be one of the ones that does sleep well. And this is just part of being human. And of course, to understand that, it's important to reach out to other people to understand that you're not alone. It is amazing how much each of us suffer, and we keep that inside. And as soon as you start to open up and talk to other people, they're like, oh, I've got exactly the same thing. Or if they haven't, they're like, oh, that's interesting. Like, that's how you think about sleep. It never really occurs to me to think about it. And if we're not attached to the views that we hold, we're more open-minded to take on board the kind of things that they're talking to us about, and to actually think, well, that's interesting. So they don't think about it like that. So next time I think about it like that, I can be aware of, oh, hang on a minute, this is just a thought. I could react to this differently if I wanted to. And that helps us to break those patterns of behaviour and thought. The interbeing nature of reality is the fact that everything is connected. Everything influences everything else. And that is just a huge topic that we'll touch on only briefly today. So when we think about mindfulness, mindfulness is not just meditation, it's a way of living. But mindfulness meditation can help us to actually take time out to look more deeply at what is going on for us. And so we can think of it as this kind of process. So the first thing that we do is to try and stop running through life. Because if we're running through life, we're not thinking clearly, we're being driven by the stress response. So we want to stop and calm. We want to recognize and accept what's going on. Then we can look more deeply at what's happening to gain the clarity and insight that will support the transformation. And this is a continuous process. So during the day, this is ongoing. It's not as though you do it once, it's a continual way of responding to life. But self-compassion is crucial. So before we begin that process, what underlying the whole process is this idea of self-compassion. And I really recommend the work of Kristin Neff. And this self-compassion workbook that I've referenced below is just fabulous. It gives you very practical things to work through. I really can't recommend it highly enough, but she's also got lots of great resources on her website. So she talks about the fact that self-compassion is made up of self-kindness, mindfulness and common humanity. So self-kindness is about caring for yourself as you do for others. So it's about supporting yourself, actively soothing and comforting and being kind when you make mistakes. So if you think about it, is that we have a choice here. We can either go through life with our own voice being like somebody sitting on our shoulder, constantly criticizing us and tripping us up, saying, oh, no, I don't think you'll be able to do that. Can you imagine having somebody walking around with you all day, undermining you constantly? But that's what a lot of us do. So the idea is to change that to somebody who is your cheerleader, your best friend, your soulmate, that whatever is going on for you, every time you doubt yourself, that they're going, oh no, it'll be great, and what about this and what about that, and they are there to support you, including saying, I think you need to have a break and a nice cup of tea now. So it's this idea of being kind to ourselves is really transformative. Some people are hesitant about this because they think, well, if I don't keep pushing myself, I'm not going to achieve things. So think back to those two different voices, those two different people. Who do you think is going to be the voice that is going to help you to achieve most in life? Is it going to be the voice that undermines you or the voice that's your cheerleader? It's clearly going to be the voice that is your cheerleader. So really don't underestimate how you speak to yourself and how kind you are to yourself. And this sense of common humanity I've touched on now is really, really, really feeling this in your heart, knowing that all of us are completely flawed works in progress. And everyone fails, everybody makes mistakes, and we all experience suffering to some degree or another. And the reason that it's so important to really engage with that is so that we let ourselves off the hook, because quite often we're frightened of doing things in case we fail. And we fall into the trap of believing that things are supposed to go well. And when they don't, we're like, oh my goodness, what's gone wrong? And it's so liberating to realize, oh, because this is just life. This is how it works. Some things go well, some things go wrong. It doesn't mean that there is anything wrong with you if things go wrong. And so this is really thinking about how you would speak to your best friend if they were going through a difficult time and learning to speak to yourself in that way. So it's mindfulness that helps us to acknowledge and turn towards our suffering and to sit with our pain long enough to respond with care and kindness instead of running away from it, just thinking, I don't like feeling like this. I'm just going to completely distract myself by doing this. And I'm just not going to face up to the fact that I'm really struggling at the moment. So turning towards it is really important, seeing how much our self-criticism is feeding it. So taking that moment to just say, wow, this is really difficult. This is a really difficult moment. Just gives you that pause so that then you can support yourself. So here's a practical idea which is taken from a brilliant book by Rick Hanson and his son called Resilient. It's on page 13, and take time afterwards to do this. Remember a time when you were on someone's side, you were there to support them, and really imagine how it felt in your body. So most people, when I talk them through this exercise, immediately they kind of sit up straighter, they square their shoulders, they're feeling stronger, really feeling how you can inspire others with your strength and your compassion. once you really feel that in your body, knowing what it's like to be on someone else's side, now you apply that attitude to yourselves. Get a sense of being a really great ally, a real strong friend that will look out for you, help you, protect you, recognizing that you have rights and needs that matter. And it's very normal if other reactions come up, such as feeling unworthy. So you just notice them as, oh, that's interesting. As soon as I try to support myself, there is a load of stuff that comes up. These are just thoughts. We want to soften them, let them settle, and come back to the sense of wishing yourself well. You can learn to be a better friend to yourself. Just as when we were children, we learnt how to interact with other people, we can learn that again as adults. So really feel how it is to be your own best friend and become a part of you. I really can't emphasize enough what a powerful couple of slides that is for you to practice in your own time. If you're looking for a meditation to support self-compassion, the one with the greatest evidence behind it is metta, or loving kindness meditation. I've got quite a few different ones on my YouTube channel. So if you just Google Katie Sheen Mindfulness YouTube, or if you go actually to the homepage of my website, if you go to the bottom, there's a link through to YouTube, and on the free resources part you can get through as well. But don't just listen to my voice, just Google metta meditations and find a voice that resonates well with you. So in the research, it's been shown to reduce inflammation. So going back to what we were saying about the brain, and of course all that we know nutritionally about what inflammatory inflammation can contribute to, it's interesting that mindfulness will help support our nutritional protocols to reduce inflammation. And the way that metta works is that they traditionally follow the format where you wish yourself well. So may I be happy, may I feel less anxious, for example. You can choose whatever words you like. Then you wish someone that you care for well in the same way. Then someone about whom you feel neutral. Then someone with whom you have difficulty. But if you're new to this, you start with someone who is mildly irritating rather than the person that has really caused you trouble within your life. You work up to that person over time, and it might be years before you get to that stage. But then you broaden out your awareness to include everyone in your local area, and eventually out into the whole world, the whole cosmos, all living beings, wishing everyone well, but holding yourself in that broad awareness alongside everyone else. So you remember on a slide a few slides ago, we were talking about how that sense of common humanity is so important. And this is a meditation that really helps with that, because we start with ourselves, but then we move outwards and outwards and outwards. And that helps our brain to stop focusing on us and our fatigue or our insomnia, and to broaden out to see all of these other things in the world. And this also helps us, obviously, there are really terrible things happening in the world at the moment. And if you're feeling very overwhelmed by that, this is the kind of meditation that would be used within mindfulness, so that we start to feel that we are connected and contributing in some way. And the result of that might well be that we take a positive action to help other people in other parts of the world, even if that is a very small action. So there are many different forms of metta. So feel free to change the words that are to feel right for you. So this is a version by Thich Nhat Hanh, and this is taken from the Be Calm, Be Happy course that I teach. And actually, this is an unashamed plug, is that I also teach this as a weekend retreat on Zoom, and we've got one coming up in May, 18th to the 20th of May, where you can explore this and other meditations. So in this one, we start with, may I be peaceful, may I be happy, may I be light in body and spirit. And then you would repeat those words, but the important thing is that you feel them in your body. You don't just recite them in your mind like a mantra. You actually feel, may I be peaceful. How does it feel to be peaceful? And at first your body and brain might go, I have no idea, I don't know what that feels like anymore. So respond to that with kindness, and just gently over a number of weeks start to explore how it feels to be peaceful. I love this line, may I learn to look at myself with the eyes of understanding and love. So as we were talking about the self-compassion, if for you identify that that is a real big thing for you to work with, then that's a really useful line that you can use. May I learn how to identify and see the sources of anger, craving and delusion in myself. Delusion is a great word, isn't it? It's a very traditional word, but it means, where have I understood things incorrectly? So if we're the kind of person that when somebody says something to us, we immediately take that as criticism, and that was a very strong habit energy of mine, is that I found it very difficult to respond positively to that. Unpicking that as to, yeah, but that doesn't mean this, it means this, and I've got the flexibility to change. So looking at learning, seeing ourselves more clearly is a really important part of this. And then may I be able to live fresh, so not weighed down by the worries of life, solid, which is, and this idea of solidity and stability is a really wonderful one to work on if we're feeling anxious, for example, and free of suffering, free of anxiety, free of worries, whatever that happens to be. So this is just one form of meta meditation. As I say, I would Google it, find lots of different ones, because there was one, so as you know, I also teach the Breathworks Mindfulness for Health course, and in their Mindfulness for Stress course, one of the lines was, may things go well for me. And when I first said that, I was like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I never ever wish that things go well for me. I'm just too busy worrying about whether or not they will go well. And so there's an important difference. So that's why it's important for us to explore a lot of different words, because sometimes you just find one that you just go, that shows up a way where I have, there's sort of hidden self-criticism. It's so much a part of how we think that we don't even see it clearly. So some of these words can really highlight areas where we can be kinder to ourselves. So as I mentioned, the core of the practice is not just to recite the phrases, but to really feel the feelings in your body. And this was an interesting study done with palliative care nurses, where they didn't just use meta meditation as a meditation. They also drew out some of the phrases, like, drawing pens and pencils and coloured paints and things like that. And they put them round the staff so that they could actually see the ones that meant most to them. And when they were having a difficult time, they could engage and again feel it in their body. So creative about how you might use some of these phrases to support yourself and developing your self-compassion. So I went off on a massive tangent there on self-compassion, because it's so important that it underlies and underpins this mindful approach to living. So everything is done with a sense of self-compassion. So stopping and calming is about noticing the fact that our mind is just all over the shop most of the time. What it's doing is it's wandering off to check the horizons to make sure that we are safe. It's looking for worries. It identifies the problem and finds solution. Now, there's a part of our brain which is called the default mode network, DMN. And what this does is that whenever we are not actively focusing our attention somewhere, our brain goes, all right, I've got a bit of time to think now. Now then, how is life going? Is there a problem? What can we do to solve it? Now, we can use this in a very positive way, of course, because you probably know that if we're trying to think of a solution to our problem, quite often if we take a break, go for a walk, make ourselves a brew, do something else, suddenly the solution will pop in. And that's because this DMN, this default mode network, has just been gently working on the problem, kind of almost on a subconscious level, and then it comes up with a solution. So as with most things in life, it's not one thing or another. It's this realizing that life is a mixture of both, and there isn't necessarily a truth. It's not as though the DMN is good or bad. It's sometimes good, sometimes bad. So where it becomes a problem is where it's found a problem and it leads to rumination because it just won't let it go. So we have this sense of running in our thoughts, and this is reflected in a sense of running in our body. Our body feels as though it's running. In fact, there's a great quote. When he first came to the West from Vietnam, he looked at all of us over here and says, "Oh, you are always running, but you never arrive." I'm like, yep, that's me. That's how my life felt at that particular time. So this sense of every time you notice that your body is running, you come back and you calm it, and your mind will follow. And literally just that sense of, whoa, let's just slow down the thinking. Let's just slow everything down so we can see it more clearly. One way to do this is to really arrive in the present moment. So you use all of your senses in order to notice what is happening for you in the present moment. Connecting with the body is important because it's so obvious when you say it out loud. Your body is always in the present moment. It's your thinking that goes into the past or the future. So when you notice that you're caught in your thinking, if you come back to notice what your body will do, you are automatically in the present moment. So always bring your mind back lightly and kindly with a smile, remembering we're cultivating this kindness and self-compassion. And the reason that our mind has wandered and is fixing on a problem is because it's trying to help us. But where we can get involved is we can help it to find something that feels like a solution. And we do that by engaging with that consciously. Now, another way that we can come into the present moment, and again, there's examples of this on my YouTube channel, it's called the 3 minutes breathing space. So you really arrive in the present moment. So where you would use this, you can use it multiple times during the day. It can take 3 minutes, you can extend it to 30 minutes, or you can do it in 30 seconds, but it's normally done as this 3 minutes process. So you notice how you are, you gather your awareness about the breath in your body, you develop that sense of stability. Once you feel stable, then you open back up again to the present moment and you rejoin your day with this sense of beginning anew. There's a really beautiful quote in mindfulness, which is that every moment is an opportunity to begin anew. Every moment is an opportunity to begin anew. So if you are running through the day, you've got that opportunity to just think, you know what, I am just going to take 3 breaths, settle myself, and I'm going to begin anew. If you're in the middle of an argument, you can just stop yourself and just say, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm getting too upset here. There is too much emotion around for me at the moment. I'm not expressing myself clearly. I just need to calm myself, and then I can come back and express myself more clearly. So at any moment, at any point, you can stop and begin anew. So when you are doing a mindfulness meditation or just taking one of those breaks where you tune in to find out how you are, you don't change what you find. So your breath, when you come to it, it might be deep, shallow, fast, slow, but what we're practicing is accepting calmly whatever we find. Just like, wow, my breath is really shallow right now. I wonder what's going on with me. Gosh, I seem to be feeling really anxious. That's interesting. So if I just sit and breathe, remembering that I'm my own best friend, can I just allow that to be, rather than fighting against it and trying it to change it? And that alone, being able to accept how we are in the present moment calmly, can take months of practice for some people. That doesn't mean you're a terrible person or terrible at mindfulness. The joy of mindfulness is that it shows up the areas where we can be kinder to ourselves. And if your thing is that you control, and if you try and control and change your breathing every time you come to it, maybe the insight for you is that that's what you're trying to do in other areas of life. So you practice allowing your breath to be as it is, and then you find that naturally you are allowing life to flow more in other aspects of life. So whatever you notice, all of those things can be invaluable insights, and it's this softening, this sense of, I don't like this, my body tightens, I can soften. I don't want to feel like this, yeah, but I can soften body, soften mind, so that you develop this sense of equanimity. If you want to feel more stable, there is something called diaphragmatic belly breathing, and there is some really nice guidance for this all over the internet. But it's basically just, you start with being aware of your lungs breathing, then you imagine the diaphragm below, and then you become aware that that's massaging your internal organs. You release the tension around your belly. So many people hold tension around there, so that the belly is just a very, very slight rise and fall of the belly. Release the holding in your hips so that everything settles down. Any kind of stress or anxiety makes us pull upwards. This helps us to settle down and release the tension. Body scans are really important. Again, a bit like metta, where there are lots and lots of different words, is to actually explore as many different body scans as you can to find the ones where the words really suit where you are in this present moment and how it can best support you. But it's all about developing this sense of friendship with your body, increasing this self-compassion and a heightened appreciation of what you can do each day rather than what you can't do. So for example, if you're fatigued, looking at what you can achieve. So Barb mentioned at the beginning, if you've got a pen or a pencil handy, this would be really handy, because I just want to do this very quick exercise with you, is that if you've got a pen or a pencil handy, maybe you can now write a sentence, and maybe you can write the sentence, this is taking lots of effort. So really put in as much effort as possible. So this is taking lots of effort. So really press down on the paper. Make sure you're concentrating as well. Really concentrate. And how does that feel in your body and your mind? So for me, I can feel tension in my hand, and that tension is already going right up my arm, through my elbow and right up into my shoulders, and it's actually already feeling as though it's affecting my shoulders and neck. And I can increase my sense of feeling stressed in my mind just by putting in loads and loads of effort into how I write. So hopefully you can feel that in yourself as well, and this is a good one to share with your clients. Notice how it feels when you put in lots of effort. Now write a sentence using too little effort and how that feels. So maybe write hardly holding the pencil, hardly writing at all. This is writing with almost no effort. So you might feel a lot less tension in your body, but you can see that the result of that might not be as good, and you might find that there is a sense of frustration, or it's just you feel a bit kind of, the word coming to mind for me today is floppy. I feel a bit floppy, a bit like lacking in motivation. So now if we write the sentence using balanced effort, so this is writing with balanced effort, hopefully you get more of a sense of flow and of balance. So how would life be if you used balanced effort all the time, both physically and emotionally? And really playing with that can really help people with fatigue. Well, to be honest, it helps all of us. I found that really useful to check in with myself. How much effort am I putting in, and where can I be kinder? So bring mindful awareness to your body and mind as often as you can remember during the day, many, many times. Notice where you're holding tension, release it, preferably on an out breath, because of course an in breath lifts you up and is a kind of a tense feeling, and an out breath settles you down. But also notice when you're holding tension in your mind, release it by broadening your perspective, literally moving from this focused awareness to that broader awareness of all the things that are going on in your experience. Taking good care of yourself and nourishing your joy every day with small acts of kindness. And what this helps us to do is to avoid this boom and bust cycle, because it's very common when we suffer from fatigue that as it flares up, we do and because we've done too much, we go into bust. We then really pay for having pushed ourselves too hard. The fatigue reduces as we rest. We have a good day, so we think, right, I'm going to catch up on all that stuff I couldn't do yesterday, and there we go again. We push ourselves too hard and we go into bust. So this boom and bust cycle is what we're trying to help people with fatigue to break out of. And I would really recommend that reference that I've put on there on the Breathworks website. They've got lots of free resources for people with long-term COVID, and particularly the fatigue with long-term COVID. And you can download a free ebook, which is all about the pacing that I want to talk about now. And there is also a really good PDF that you can download from the Royal College of Occupational Therapists, and I've given you the link there. So pacing is about being kind to yourself, giving yourself permission to slow down, to practice balanced effort, to not expect to be able to do everything at once or at the same pace that you used to. And the idea is to do less than you think you can, so you avoid pushing yourself into that bust situation. So it's about building rest into your tasks, planning rest breaks, because of course resting is key to recharging your energy. Also about breaking activities into smaller tasks, spreading them throughout the day. So because you will recover much faster if you work on a task until you are just starting to get tired, rather than if you push yourself into exhaustion. But this, if you're 110% type of person or you're very task focused, can be a really important thing to start to engage with. So look at the activities you do on a daily and weekly basis and develop a plan to spread them out evenly. Don't try to complete several activities in one go, and notice your natural circadian rhythm. So if you notice that you always get a dip around 3 or 4 o'clock, build in a break at that point, and maybe that's a good time to lie down and do a body scan, for example, or a relaxing meditation, or just to sit on the sofa with a cup of tea and watch the birds out of the window. But notice where you get the natural dips and work with those. planning. So think about ways that you can do activities differently. So for example, can you sit down during tasks like washing and getting dressed? Rather than lifting and carrying, can you push and slide things? Can you rearrange rooms so that the items you use most are easy to reach? And there are lots of simple pieces of equipment, and the NHS recommends this Living Made Easy, because I don't know if you're aware, but the NHS has got its own COVID recovery website where some of these things are available to download. Think about prioritising. We all have a finite source of energy. So how are we going to use it each day? So there might be some tasks that we can stop or do less often or do differently. And of course, asking for help, which is a big deal for some of us. And maybe what mindfulness shows is that we need to get better at being honest about where we need support. So make sure you have a balance of the necessary tasks, but also things that you love to do, the things that you're going to do for fun and enjoyment. So start each day by asking, what do I need to do? And what do I want to do today? Is there something that I can put off another day? What can I ask someone else to help me with? And in particular, I know it sounds so obvious, don't hold your breath. The minute that you hold your breath during anything, you're adding a load of stress into it. And it's so common that we hold our breath. So mindfully just releasing that and letting your breath flow differently, letting your body be soft while you do a task, reduces the amount of energy that you're expending. Bend with your knees rather than from your waist is another thing. And there are lots of other examples like this from the Royal College of Occupational Therapists on that handout. But I thought it would be interesting, seeing as obviously we're all nutrition focused here today, is to look at some examples that they give for the 3 Ps around cooking. So pacing, spreading the preparation throughout the day. So example, peeling vegetables in the morning, cooking in the afternoon, reheat in the evening. Now we all know that from a nutritional perspective that is not ideal, but what we're looking at here is helping somebody to move from maybe what they're doing is phoning for a takeaway every night or using ready meals to actually re-engaging with fresh food and looking after themselves. And that might well give that person a sense of empowerment and also help them to engage more with the kind of protocols that you're suggesting. Maybe sitting to prepare food. You know, we automatically go and stand in the kitchen to chop things. But just thinking, well, actually, I could sit down and do this might really mean that people could conserve energy enough to find it easier to prepare food. Take rest during and after cooking, and also planning ahead. So the idea of cooking larger amounts, refrigerating or particularly freezing the extra portions, simply getting everything you need ready before you start. So maybe you could potter around in the morning, get everything together, have a rest, and then when you start to cook, you have recovered from the energy that it's taken to prepare. Find recipes, obviously, with a short preparation time, but simple things like using a trolley to move stuff around, depending on how far it is from your table, for example. And of course, on days where your fatigue is really overwhelming, maybe there are some healthy frozen ready meals that you could suggest for your clients, and also thinking about whether or not you can share the cooking. Again, this is something where people might have a perception, yeah, but it's my job to care for other people. And maybe what they need to soften around is that belief that it is them that has to do all of it. And maybe that opens up to sharing these kind of chores within the household. Not that they always feel like chores. Cooking obviously can feel like something that's very enjoyable. Now, within breathworks, we take this idea of pacing to a slightly deeper level. So what we encourage people to do is keep a diary of everything for 7 days. And you can download the templates for this from their long-term COVID. Then you analyse the diary. These are called baselines, and so you then get people to experiment with the baseline. So the baseline would be, right, I notice that if I stand in the kitchen and cook for half an hour, it absolutely wipes me out for the rest of the night. So like, okay, well, how about if you stood and cooked for 20 minutes? How would that feel? And so you reduce the time and then see how that is, and you find the baseline, and you notice that baseline can be fluid from one day to another, but it helps people to avoid that boom and bust cycle. You stop before you're exhausted. Also be aware of sustainers and drainers. So get people to list everything that sustains them, giving you pleasure and energy. So these are not just physical activities, but also small things in life that make you feel good, and also list the things that drain you of pleasure and energy. And with your sustainers, because this is a real challenge for people with chronic illness, including chronic fatigue, is that affecting your ability to engage with these activities? And if this is the case, is there another way that you can engage with this activity? And once people start to become really creative about that, then it's a wonderful part of the course when we work on this, and you can see people starting to think more laterally about their whole life and how they can enjoy it more. So few activities are as all or nothing as we think they are. What feelings did a sustainer stimulate in you? And is there another activity that makes you feel similar? How can you reduce the impact of the drainers on your life? And notice your top 5 sustainers. Keep them with you in your wallet so that when you start to feel low, it reminds you to connect with them as often as possible. So just for the very last thing to leave you with is this idea of taking in the good. So I talked about earlier about the default mode network, which looks at, searches out problems, but we also have the negativity bias, which is also part of our survival process, because it's very important that we remember things that were negative. We need to remember where the danger was so that we don't go there again, or we don't do that activity again. So those negative experiences are instantly stored in our memory in order to protect us. Positive experiences aren't so important from a survival point of view, but from an enjoying life point of view, boy, they are crucial. But interestingly, and this comes from the work of Rick Hampson, positive experiences usually take around 15 seconds of focus before becoming stored in our memory. So that's roughly 3 slow in-breaths and out-breaths. So this helps to reset our baseline stress levels, but it's really worth us noticing, oh, this feels quite nice. This is a pleasant moment, and I'm actually going to really enjoy how pleasant it feels. And it's a real turning point when I realized that I could be lying on the sofa feeling absolutely dreadful. I could look out the window, see the birds, and that was a pleasant moment. So I didn't need to get rid of the fatigue or the pain in order to experience happiness. I just needed to notice those happy moments that I could experience whilst those other things were going on in the background, and it changed the focus of how I interpreted my days. You know, we talked about earlier about the values. So also, however bad I was feeling, I could send a nice message to someone else, send a card to somebody else that somebody else might have to walk to the post box to post for me, but that would make me feel good. And then obviously people would communicate back. And that starts to be where your mind naturally notices things more. So really take time to nourish your joy and happiness each day. Don't forget about the healing power of smiling. This is, I actually have it behind me today as my calligraphy. Peace begins with your lovely smile. So smiling at yourself with kindness, it sounds really random, but I can't tell you how helpful I found this. So you wake up and normally your brain just goes straight into the day, worrying about what's coming or starting to tell you stories. So bring it back and wake up by smiling at yourself, starting from your toes, including each part of your body in turn, and so that you're raising your energy for the day. And you can reverse that at the end of the day, working from your head right down to your toes, and find phrases that work for you. So maybe on your in-breath, I'm aware of my toes and I'm smiling to my toes. And we can include any painful parts of our body or any that are feeling particularly fatigued because they want to feel well, so we can send them kindness. But really thinking about how we can wash and dress and eat and live with kindness and care as if we were caring for someone else. And really, as I said, don't underestimate that idea that I talked about before about being your own best friend. As you wake up in the morning, imagine your best friend sitting on your shoulder going, shall I make you a nice brew? Shall we go down? Nice cup of tea. Let's start the day with something pleasant. So just, you know, really think about how you can care for yourself with kindness and make it fun. Mindfulness should feel fun, even if parts of it we're looking at things that we find difficult. So I hope that you've enjoyed today. I'd be really interested to know about what felt most relevant for you. So if you've got any thoughts, questions, practical ideas, we've always got loads of expertise in the room. So please pop them into the chat box, and I'm going to pass back over to Barb, who's going to host us through this next half hour of discussion. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. This drops down.
Thank you, Katie. That was amazing. You've given us all such an amazing toolkit of ideas there. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.